Hey there, Dango Stu here. In today's video I'm going to be installing these LED spotlights onto the front of my Royal Enfield Himalayan. This particular set of lights came as just the lights themselves, so there's no relay, no switch, anything like that. So we're going to be building up the whole thing from scratch. In some ways that makes it a little bit trickier, but in other ways it makes it a good way to sort of explain what I'm doing and how these lights work. For those of you who saw my video a few weeks ago on installing the USB charger, my plan was to run a single cable up to the front of the bike, then fork off from there, power the USB charger and also power the lights. I'm not really confident that the wire supplied with that USB charger is of a thick enough gauge to supply power for both those things. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is go back and replace that single wire with a heavier gauge one. The first thing I'm going to do is take off the seats and the fuel tank, exactly the same as the USB charger video, so I won't go through that again in detail, but once I've got that off, we'll pick up from there. So this is the wire I originally installed for the USB charger, the one that came with the charger. And I'm just not confident that it can take the current load, so I'm going to upgrade this. The process, however, is exactly the same as when I installed this original lighter gauge wire, so I won't bore you with that either. This is the cable I'm moving to. It's a PowerTech cable. I got it from JCar Electronics, and it's considered auto marine and rated at 15 amps. This is the screw from the battery on the Himalayan. So I've just got a couple of these 6mm ring terminals that are just about the right size for those. The other thing I've got is this sort of reasonably waterproof, ruggedized fuse holder. So I'm going to be using this one to make up the new wire. Unfortunately with the Himalayan, the negative terminal is the one closest to the front of the bike. Adding this fuse holder is going to extend the positive. So I'm going to have to make that negative much longer to not only make up for this extra distance, but also reach the back of the battery. So if we take that extra distance into account, say the battery's about this wide, then I'm going to have to cut the positive right back to about here. I'm going to solder the fuse connector to the main wire. Some people aren't big fans of soldering in an automotive environment because the heat can sometimes melt solder. I personally never had an issue with it and I find it gives me the most reliable connection, so it's what I'm going to do. Before I solder it, I'm just going to slip a little bit of heat shrink tube on. If you're using heat shrink when you're soldering, just make sure you push that heat shrink far enough away from the join so that it doesn't actually contract from the heat of soldering. I'm going to let that cool for a little bit, then I'll put the heat shrink over and just use a heat gun to shrink it down. Now just strip the end of the negative and crimp the terminals on both the positive and the negatives. When you crimp connectors, just pull on them to make sure they're secure. You're much better off finding out now than having them fail later. So here we go, now we've got our positive and negative, the negative slightly longer to reach the back of the battery, and our fuse holder in. Down the track I'm going to be popping a 15 amp fuse in this holder, but I'm going to leave it empty for now so that no current's flowing while I'm doing the wiring. When I did the original one, I cable tied this wire along the main loom, so I'll just cut those cable ties, we'll pull it out. I've got this excess cable here from the USB charger, so what I'm going to do is cut that cable there, throw away everything from there towards the battery, and then replace that with the thicker cable. The thinner cable's still fine to go up to the USB charger itself, because that's all the current it draws. Alright, out with the old and in with the new. So this old lead used to have the positive longer than the negative, so it wasn't ideal for this bike. It wasn't a particularly neat install because of the way the battery sort of runs. So in some ways it's a bit of a double improvement. I don't need a lot of length in this cable, it doesn't have far to go, but it's always good to give yourself a little bit of extra slack because, you know, you can always cut some off, you can't add it on as easily. Where we're at now is we've got the positive and the negative terminals attached, the fuse holder just sitting here in this bit of a groove under the seat, and then the new wire just cable tied neatly to the loom until it gets to the front of the bike here. Then coming down here is the old wires from the USB charger, and this is going to be the junction point up in here. As these lights came, they have a plug on the end, but I'm just going to cut that off and solder them directly to some new wires, some extension wires, because I just don't want the bulky plug. I think it's a chance for a bit of corrosion to get in. They're nice, high quality sealed plugs, but I just don't need them. I don't need to extend these wires very long, but I'm going to add about a foot. That'll give me plenty of room. I can route the wires where I need and then just cut off the excess. Okay, both the lights are done now. No great mystery, just add about a foot of cable, soldered, heat shrink, then heat shrink over the top of that, so should be pretty waterproof. The next thing I'm going to do is mount the bracket the lights are going on. I got this bracket from Donovan in Mumbai. If you look up Donovan Roderick's on Facebook, particularly on the Himalayan riders groups or whatever, you'll find him there and just have a chat with him. You can order one if you want one as well. To mount this, I'm just going to go grab an Allen key and then we'll undo the bolts holding the front fender on, and then I'll find some longer bolts that allow me to put this on. It's these front fasteners here I'm taking out. These fasteners have a 5mm Allen key that I'm just putting onto this 3/8 ratchet. The bracket just goes on the front like this. I'm going to put a couple of little nylon washers just to sort of dampen the metal on metal underneath it. I'm going to use these bolts here. They're only marginally longer, but I think it's enough. They've got a 10mm hex head rather than the Allen key. I do have some longer ones that have an Allen key on them, which is great because it means we'll have Allen key front and back. But these ones are stainless, these ones aren't. Although these are sold for motorbikes, actually part of a motorbike kit, I found they rust pretty quickly and I don't want that. What I may actually do is swap all 4 out so that once again you can get a single tool and take the whole guard off rather than having to swap between them. Anyway, for now let's just mount the light bracket. So I'm going to put the little nylon washer underneath, bolt through. I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on the end of the bolt because I figure if you're going to be doing a lot of off-road riding, lots of vibration, why not? So I'm just getting both of them in while they're still loose, and then I'll tighten both of them up. Now I've got the bracket on, I'm going to mount the lights to the bracket. The lights themselves came with little stainless nylocks, so that's good. They're on now. I'll bring around the front and give you a bit of a preview. So there they are. They sit quite nicely. They don't rub here at all, which is good. I was a little bit worried about the clearance here to here, but that seems fine as well, so pretty happy with that. Obviously we can adjust them up and down, then tighten here, and we can adjust them in and out, but I'll do that at night one day when I can sort of really see what the sort of light they cast. Here on each side we've got our speedo cable here and a brake cable here, a brake hose here. So that's what I'm going to use to run them up under here. This side I think I'm just going to bring out and come straight to this speedo cable. After that, both the speedo cable and the brake hose go into a metal bracket. So there's not enough room for all the cables to go in there, but I'm now going to cable tie this to the bracket so that the speedo cable is not taking all the weight. I'm also leaving a little bit of slack in this cable because should you sort of get the front wheel off the ground and unload the suspension, this will come down a bit, so I don't want it to be tight. Alright, I'll go cable tie the other side and then we'll go and have a look at a diagram of how I'm going to wire it up. In order to get these lights to work, I'm going to have to put a relay in the circuit, a simple 4-pin relay. So I'll draw that on the board. The 4 pins of the relay are numbered in a standard way. So pin 30 is power coming in. This is power straight from the battery. So with power coming in from the battery to pin 30, and then it comes out at pin 87 when the relay is activated. So when the relay gets switched on, power comes out pin 87 and it goes to both our lights in parallel. From the lights, we have 2 negatives and they just come down and go straight across to the battery negative. Pin 85 on the relay is also a ground, so that also just goes straight to battery negative. All that leaves us with is pin 86, and that's the switch pin. What happens with the relay is whenever current gets sent to pin 86, then current's allowed to flow from pin 30 to pin 87 and the lights come on. The way I'm going to wire pin 86 is to have power come out, go to a manual switch. That'll be a little switch I'll install on the side of the bike. From the other side of the switch I'm installing, I'm going to run a wire to the output of the high beam light. This way the lights will only come on when the high beam's on, will supply power to the switch, and the switch is closed, it'll then supply power to pin 86. If either the switch is off or the high beams are off, then the fog lights will go off, and that's the way I want it set up. This means that I can have my high beam on without the LED on, and it means that if I have my LED on, all I've got to do is flick one switch on the handlebars and all the lights will go off quickly, and that's for if I'm passing an oncoming vehicle. None of that is particularly tricky other than now going and trying to find the wire for the high beam switch so I can tap into that. Somebody did mention down the track that you can void your warranty by tapping into the wiring of the bike. I'm not so worried about it. I don't hold warranties in a lot of stead. If my gearbox dies and I've affected a wire, I don't think anyone's going to win a case saying that my gearbox died because I cut a wire. And if the wiring fails, well, I'll fix it. Here's our high beam switch here. And then from the handle here, the loom comes down, comes under, and then comes into this rubber shroud here. So we'll take this apart, then I'll see if I can disconnect the plug and then put a multimeter and figure out which wire is the high beam. These two plugs, a 9-pin and a 3-pin, come from that loom, from that handlebar. What we're going to do now is get a multimeter probe and just probe each pin, switching the high beam on and off, and see what we see. It's a little bit hard to see in there, but here you can see that red light means I've got power to the multimeter. So you can see when I switch the high beam on and off, the power to this pin comes on and off. It also looks like my battery's going a bit flat, so I think I'll put that on the charger. 11.1's not good at all. So we found the pin. I'll pull that plug out now and show you which one it is. So on this plug here, it was the yellow one between the purple one and the white one with the black stripe. So that's the one I need to tap into and take to my relay via the manual switch. It's now day 3 of this install. I haven't been able to find much time for filming lately, so sorry this video has taken so long to get out. Where we'll pick up is I'll just show you that I've now stripped some of the conduit away from that wiring loom so I can be a little bit more accurate with those wire colours now. What we actually have in here is this purple one is purple with a red stripe, this white one's white with a black stripe, and the one I'm picking up on is this one here, which is yellow with either a black or a dark blue stripe by the looks of it. So that's the one we're going to be stripping and tapping into. This type of wire stripper can be quite good for taking a bit of the insulation off the middle of a wire too, but I'll just see if I've got enough room to do that. If I don't, I'll just carefully cut some back with a razor blade. With a torch, I can definitely confirm it's yellow with a blue stripe is the high beam light. I can fit these pliers in, so I'm just going to put them on and use them just to bare a bit of the wire like that. And then from there I'll be able to pick up and go off to my relay. There with the little torch light, you can see the yellow and blue is the one I've stripped, just about 1 centimetre off. Now I'll go through the last few things I'm going to use for this install. Next up is a good waterproof toggle switch. This switch is a Duratec switch that I got from JCar Electronics. You can order them online or go to one of their stores. You can also use just about any waterproof switch. What I like about these though is they're just completely moulded in rubber, so they're really nicely done. I mainly use these for boat work, so if you watch my other channel, Dango Marine, you'll see a lot of these sorts of switches floating around. I think anything good enough for use in a boat, corrosion-wise, is going to be great for a motorcycle. This switch comes with 2 bullet connectors on the end. My plan is to chop both those bullet connectors off, then I'm going to splice this red wire straight onto the yellow wire with the blue stripe. That wire has power whenever the high beams are on, and then if I also switch this switch on, power will come through to the yellow wire, which will connect to the relay, which will in turn activate the lights. To mount the relay, I've got one of these little relay holders. I don't even think it's got a part number, it's very sort of generic thing, but they're really common. This is actually a 5-pin relay holder. I'm only using a 4-pin relay for this, but that's no problem. So what I need to do is take the yellow wire from here and attach it to the correct pin onto this relay holder. If we go back to that diagram I showed you on the board, the pin we want is pin 86 on this. So pin 86 to the yellow, red to the yellow and blue wire on the bike. The final piece of the puzzle is the relay itself. So this particular relay has a fuse built into it, and that fuse protects the switching signal, which is the one coming from the high beam on the bike. This relay then just plugs into this relay holder, and it gives us some nice wires to solder to. So I'll start soldering this up to the switch, and then we'll start doing the other wires on the bike. Now I've got the wire from the switch to the relay soldered, I can do it on the bench easily. Pretty much the rest I'm going to have to do on the bike. So what I'm going to do now is drill and mount this switch. I'm going to put it on the side near the indicator, not because it's a particularly great place to reach the switch, but because the switch has a quite big back to it. It's just a place where there's plenty of room behind the plate. To mount these switches, you simply take the collar off, drill a hole the same diameter as that threaded section, push it through, then put the collar back on. I'm not going to come too far forward because there actually is a metal bracket behind there and I don't want that getting in the way of the switch. So I'll come here close towards the edge. I'll just push the switch through now and then put the cut back on. Next thing I'm going to do is wrap that red wire around the yellow and blue, then we'll solder that up. So here you can see now the red wire, and it's just wrapped around that exposed section of the yellow and blue. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of liquid electrical tape onto that solder joint, and then I'll wrap it in tape on it. Liquid electrical tape just comes with a little brush in the bottle, so I'm just going to brush it on. I'll let the liquid electrical tape set for a little while, then we'll just put normal tape around it too. Alright, in the meantime, I'm going to collect all my grounds together, twist them together, solder them and seal them as well. Here we have every ground or every battery negative tied together. So the black one is the ground from the USB charger, then we've got a ground from each of the LED lights themselves, and a ground from the relay. So what I'm going to do now is solder these together, trim it a little bit, and then put some heat shrink on that as well. When you've got a lot of wires to join like that, another way you can go about it is putting a ring terminal each one, then put a bolt through it. But I find this way it's easier to solder it so you get a good connection, and then also easier to heat shrink the whole thing to keep it insulated. Once again, more liquid electrical tape. Now that liquid electrical tape's set, I've just taped up that loom again, and we've got our switch coming out, this wire off to our relay holder, and I'll plug these connectors back in now. What we have now is 3 bundles of wire all grouped together. So we've got the earths we did first, then this is the positive from the battery, which now goes to the relay and to the USB charger, and then the outlet from this relay then has 2 positives going to both lights. And that's pretty much the wiring complete. So I've plugged the relay in, and I've put a fuse in at the back here now. So what that gives us now, it's all wired up, is ignition on, get our normal headlight, high beam switch here, gives us our high beam on, then this switch here gives me my running lights. Now if I flick my high beam off, all those lights go off. So if I see a passing car, I can flick them off, flick them back on again, then as soon as I turn this switch, I'm switching off those LED lights, and I'm just back to normal high beam and low beam. So that's the configuration I was after, and seems to work pretty well. I'll wrap this one up now because I've got to run again, unfortunately. But what I'll do afterwards is simply pull that rubber shroud over the connectors, find a neat place for the relay to live, get all that bundled up with maybe some more cable ties, put the tank back on, put it all back together. Next thing I want to try and do is get a camera on the helmet so we can head out one night, go for a ride for the first time rather than just being in the shop the whole time, and start getting them angled a little bit and see what's the best sort of spread to get on the road. I can angle them sideways as well as up and down, so I'm hoping that, you know, eventually I'll get it tweaked so it gives me the optimal sort of spread of light. Alright, until then, take care, safe riding, see you soon.